Hotep with your brother Beniti. I'm Ray back with another post. Today the topic we're going to talk about is subject of fear. Does fear enslave you? Does it control you subconsciously? Fear and ignorance are probably the two number one reasons why people are pretty much mentally in the state that they're in. We're going to talk about the transition stages of change that one goes through, and sometimes how individuals try to resist that change or go against that change, which actually hinders their spiritual growth. So we're going to take some excerpts here from various different sources. One book I'd recommend, some of the information is coming out. We actually talked about this on the radio show, the Emerald Tablets, Alchemy, the Self-Transformation. The book gets heavy into alchemy, dealing with inner alchemy of the mind, and really this is kind of the level or the focus that we need to be on in this day and time, so we can make those spiritual transitions, so we can make those changes. Because when you use the terminology that nature changes and we have to change with nature, that's exactly what that means. By tapping into the divine mind. And I did a post a few posts back, inner alchemy and inner vibrations of the mind. We'll kind of tie us into that. But first, let's attack this topic of fear, and does it control you, and are you a slave to it, for lack of a better word? Okay. So let's go on. It says, many persons are controlled or directed in their thinking and acting by the emotion of fear, without being directly conscious of the degree or extent of the influence. On the other hand, there are multitudes who thoroughly realize that fear is the greatest and most enslaving problem they have to face. Perhaps the greatest fear is fear of the unknown. Among psychologists and psychiatrists, fear of the unknown is classified as a fundamental, logical, and reasonable emotion. The strange thing about it is that it increases with a certain degree of intelligence or with a certain degree of acquired knowledge. The very ignorant, unthinking, unintelligent person has less fear of the unknown than the one who has a smattering of knowledge and a small degree of wisdom. Children who have not learned much of life have less fear of unknown things, and are less affected by their lack of knowledge than adults who have acquired some knowledge and have dabbled in a lot of subjects that give them a false or incomplete idea of many important principles. So that old saying, you fear what you know or don't know. You tend to become resistant sometimes when a certain information or level of information is brought to you that might be adverse or oppose what you've been taught, or I should say programmed with. Now, something we've been talking about heavy over the weeks. In order for you to really tap into the essence of what this means, the subconscious mind has to be reprogrammed. In dealing with the inner alchemy of the mind, when it talks about one making themselves less dense and shedding things that are weighing them down, such as certain aspects of the ego, attributes of hatred, jealousy, envy, greed, lust, all these things make one more dense and confines them to the physical realm, so they're not able to vibrate at that correct frequency, so they can tap into that divine consciousness. So one has to rid themselves and make themselves less dense and release that stuff, so they can their vibe and their frequency can speed up at the correct pace, so they can connect. Now, that's a hard thing to do. It's not a simple thing to do, because when you deal just in everyday life, everyday situations, everyday struggles, one is fighting this on a regular basis. So now let's get into the fear of transition or change. And I'm going to continue reading here. Fear of this kind is manifested by the average person most often when face to face with the possibility of imminent transition. The future state with unknown conditions across the borderline creates a horrifying fear and makes the prospect of transition a dreadful one. Despite the fact that every branch of religion teaches that life beyond earth is a magnificent and beautiful experience filled with all the possibilities of joy and happiness, the average religious person at the point of death is like a person of no religion at all, in fearing the unknown beyond the grave. This is not meant as a criticism of religion, but of the weakness of human faith. Faith seems to sustain the average human in matters of passing or temporary value, but when it comes to matters that have duration and continuous influence, faith seems to be of little value if positive knowledge is lacking. So, again, faith and belief can only take you so far. And in dealing with the fear of the unknown, now I mentioned here death. Let's talk about this for a minute. This is something people fear. This is something that's a taboo or subject not amongst spiritually conscious people or mystics, but more so people who are in that state of ignorance, that state of unknowing, which creates that state of fear. What happens beyond the grave? What actually happens to the human body when it gives up the last physical breath and starts to make that transition? Most people gravitate towards religions out of fear, out of control, meaning very simply, you're programmed from day one with this whole religious concept. If you don't abide by all these rules and regulations, you're going to go to this place called hell, where you'll be tortured for eternity. So it creates that fear of the unknown. It creates that fear inside of you that says, I need to get in line. Excuse me. I need to get in line, do what I'm told, and follow all the rules, regulations, and restrictions of this faith that I belong to. Because if I don't, then I'm going to go to this bad place called hell, creating fear again. And people become enslaved to this fear. Most people, again, gravitate towards these religions out of fear, because they believe in their minds, as they've been programmed, that they're going to go to some place called hell and be tortured if they don't get in line. Now, as it said here, I thought something interesting, and I want to pop down here. Faith seems to sustain the average human in matters of temporary value. So the system of faith and belief can only carry you so far, but dealing with information that have a continued duration, faith doesn't give you a thorough explanation of these matters or these topics or these subjects. So the topic of taboo and death is death, in the sense that most people have theories on it. You can go into many different religions. They have their theory on what happens at death. Now, we can even go back into the ancient Egyptian cultures, and we will see they give a more metaphysical and a spiritual explanation of what we call death. But bottom line is this: nobody really knows exactly what's going to happen step by step when they make that transition from physical death into eternal life. Now, we can read all different types of books, we could do all different types of research, we can study in depth the opening of the mouth ceremony, and how the ancient Egyptians, for an example, explained the transition from the physical world, or from mortality into immortality. Nobody really knows what happens, and I think this is why people gravitate towards doctrines or a multitude of levels of consciousness, because they want to know, the answer to that one question: what happens to my soul at the time of death? Again, in that it again puts you and lines you up in that system of fear. Now, the transition stage, not just talking about death, because it's not just fearing the transition of death. That's just one aspect. People fear transitions into a multitude of different states. It could be being accustomed to a certain way of thinking, you might for many years, for an example, follow the religion that you thought was 100% correct. But then when you're presented with information that gets a little more in depth and a little more detail, and might be, opening or raising questions to ideas and ideologies that you've been taught, some people will fight and resist that because it's hard for them to make the transition or accept the change. Now, this is why, again, when I've talked in previous posts, this is why it's hard to talk to some religious people that are embedded in faith and belief, because they don't want to make that transition. So people resist different change and transitions on a multitude of levels. It could also be something so minute as a change in a relationship, not wanting to let one go so one can continue and move on further in life and progress, but some people want to stay stuck at that point. And so it can be so minute as not accepting the fact that a relationship is over and moving on to something, better. So this ties into the classifications of fears and what keeps people's minds mentally enslaved. Now, we've talked about numerous times, and even if you listen to the radio show, we talk about the more you stay up under something or somebody. Now, when I say something, that could be any type of religion, dogma, or philosophy. And when you stay up under somebody, like a lot of these organizations over the years have had one supreme leader, you cut off your connection and your divinity, and we talked about this before. Your DNA explosions and your consciousness, or the evolution of it thereof, ceases to exist. Because once you make that claim that you exclusively belong to something, you disconnect yourself from spiritual growth, and you're kind of stuck at that point. So what tends to happen is people, again, get in comfort zones and they resist this type of change. So if you're talking to somebody, for an example, and you might be presenting information to them that might be adverse to what they accept in their mind as reality or truth, creates that fear factor. Now, the flip side to it is sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes some people, when they're shaken, in a very quick and abrupt way, on the flip side, some individuals open up and are receptive to that change. But for the most part, most people aren't. Now let's talk about fear of the threshold. We see fear of the unknown manifested by normal persons when they enter a building or structure with which they are unacquainted and find themselves in the dark, about to cross the threshold into something unknown to them. The fear of what lies just beyond in such a case is identical with the fear of the future. There are those who are equally fearful in taking the journey by ship because they have never crossed the ocean and have no positive knowledge of what lies beyond the horizon. Scores of people expressed their fear the moment the ship had been freed from its dock and had pointed its bow toward the eastern or western horizon of the sea. Immediately they began to question what the evening and tomorrow would bring, what would happen in the dark or in a storm, or when one's foot was placed upon foreign soil. Let's skip down. Teaching the child not to go here or there because of the boogeyman. A common habit many years ago made more children fearful and unknown than any one thing and influenced them throughout their lives. Let's stop there. When we talked about, a few minutes back, about reprogramming the subconscious mind, let's use that little metaphor it's using here, how you can instill fear, for an example, in a child when some children in their childhood, for an example, are taught stories of the boogeyman. Now, we talk about trauma on the subconscious mind. Whether we're aware of it or not, something like that is an everlasting trauma that's lodged in the subconscious mind. And until you address it and deal with it, it keeps itself lodged in there, and it keeps that system of fear on it. So if a little kid is spooked out with these stories, okay, it's instilling in the subconscious a fear that will resonate with them even as they get older in their later years. Now, when the statement is made to reprogram the subconscious mind, step one of that process is by going deep into the inner caverns of your mind and address all of your fears, all of the negative things about yourself that need to be corrected before you can move forward. Now, this is very, very critical in the sense, if you want to make that spiritual evolution, you want to make that transition and change, you most definitely have to address the core issues that you are dealing with as an individual. Let's talk about now hesitancy to try something new. Now, this is kind of piggybacks what we were just talking about a few minutes ago. Okay, people fear change. Okay, people sometimes fear something new because of the abruptness of what it brings. Let's read. This leads us to a second element of the fear complex, hesitancy, which unconsciously affects us in our thinking and acting when we venture into new lines, new acts, and new fields of thought. It affects people in their work and in their private lives. It affects young and old alike. Experiences in life that beget wisdom and knowledge are the only things that eventually free such men and women from the influence of fear. The emotion of fear is not always on the surface and is not easily recognized as such. Many persons have different names for it. The most common name is caution. Other names are reasoning, consideration, analysis, preparation, and forethought. Those who claim to have no superstition beliefs will tell you that their hesitancy is due to a hunch, whereas in fact it is their fear that is warning them. Okay? So change. Okay? Change incites a certain emotion of fear. Because again, most people that get kind of comfortable in their comfort zones don't want to address several different facts about themselves. And this could be, again, down to the very essence, if from the beginning stages of your life, let's establish this, you're programmed to accept who and what God is, to accept who and what you are, and in your scheme of things. Okay, and that starts with the basis of faith and belief in the Bible. Meaning somebody had to sit you down at a certain age and introduce the concept of God to you. At that very moment, whether it was your parents, relative, friend, whatever, what was birthed in the subconscious at that moment now is something that resonates through your being. So, for an example, a religious person is taught that there's some God that, he's in heaven, and poof, he snapped his fingers and created everything. And then you're introduced to the Bible stories, and you're introduced to all the rules and regulations that come with being a Bible following person. So now this is something that's been programmed into you, because the deep thing is one has to ask themselves. And again, I want to backpedal just a minute. We all at one point were sat down and explained to what God was or who the Creator was. It doesn't matter, at some point when we were very young. Now, the question we have to meditate and reflect on, before it was brought to your attention that the Creator existed, did the Creator exist? Again, the question is, before somebody sat down and introduced you the concept of God or the Creator, did the Creator exist prior to that? Now, of course, the answer is yes. But the thing is, when you look at it from a faith belief perspective, you can't really answer that question. Now, you can get philosophical and say, well, God always existed, but you really can't explain that either. Because the problem with putting a time frame on everything, and this is what I told you before, time is a motherfucker in the sense it keeps people binded under the spell of illusion. Because when you put a beginning and an ending on something, and this, again, would be a concept that would incite a certain emotion of fear in the individual because it's thinking outside the box of what they've been programmed with. If you go into the book of Genesis, and the very first chapter, very first verse, it says, in the beginning, God created. Now, we know when we read on, you get later on down to the verses, 1:1 says God's Spirit roamed across the face of the deep, which water's already there. We know water means life. So, obviously, fact of the matter is, can't be the beginning, okay? This is obviously picking up from one of the many replenishing periods on our planet, because our planet has been destroyed a multitude of times by meteorite showers, etc., and we've always emerged from those replenishing periods and repopulated the earth. Confirmation of that is in Genesis chapter 1 verse 26, when after humans are created, what's dictated to them is be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. The Hebrew word is more like to refill, which is confirmation this can't be the very beginning. The problem that happens when you say the beginning, you're now stamping it with the false concept of time. Because now the question is, how did God get there? Okay, it's a logical question, and nobody will give you a factual answer for it. Because if it says, in the beginning God created, when you're reading that biblical story, God is already there. And for the most part, you're taught not to question that. Okay, because if you say something like I just said, well, how did God get there? You're going to get a whole bunch of hocus pocus mythology that can't be explained. So this would be a perfect example of a person not wanting to accept, of thinking outside that box. So it's easier for one to just think, poof, there was some being called God. Again, he snapped his fingers. Everything was created. If you're good, you go to heaven. When you die, if you're bad, you go to hell. That's a lot easier to just live by than take the actual time to, as we say, put in the work, put in the research, do the ritualistic work, all the things that one must do to make that transformation in their DNA. Most individuals don't really want that. That's why you've heard me say on a multitude of classes and posts, people scream for change, but I realize most of them are full of shit. They don't really want change. They want somebody else to do it for them so they can follow somebody and constantly be up under something or somebody. That's just the reality of it. So to reprogram the subconscious basically means everything that we've been taught has been wrong. We need to go in there and basically redo it. Let's give you an example. It's like reprogramming a computer. It's like reshaping the way that one individual thinks. Fear, again, of the unknown, fear of resisting transition, again, is what keeps an individual not vibrating at its full capacity. Okay, so it's gets a lot more in depth and detail. But to finish off and connect it to what we were talking about is the hesitancy or the resistance to try something new. These are all the reasons why we resist change or to try something new. Because most people are in that comfort zone, in that box. They don't want to go outside of it, so they're not trying to hear anything that you say, and it's hard to penetrate an individual on that level mentally. So definitely something to marinate on and absorb. All right, let's talk about don't give fear a life of its own. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. Okay. The average individual does not realize that the fear of a thing animates it, strengthens it, and enthrones it until it becomes a master which whips us and holds us in servitude. Man, let me stop there. That is a powerful statement, and that basically summarizes why as a whole, and I'm not talking to people that are spiritually conscious, that are on that path, that are awake. So that doesn't apply to you if you're listening to this and you're one of those people. But the average individual that may not be spiritually conscious or on that path or spiritually awake on any level would fall into this category. I want to read that on. You give fear its life. This is pretty deep. The average individual does not realize that the fear of a thing animates it. So when you fear something and you're giving off that adrenaline and that energy, you're animating it or giving it life. It also says it strengthens it and enthrones it until it becomes a master which whips us and holds us in servitude. So the more you fuel things with fear and become resistant to the change, that energy can overtake you. Now that would explain again if you have people that are just paranoid about every and any little thing. They're paranoid about somebody touching them or bumping into them. They're paranoid about getting sick or ill. They're paranoid about a freak accident happening to them, or they're paranoid about losing all their worldly stature and their personal belongings. This is all a connection to that. Okay, so this is something again that we have to take into account that puts some individuals in the category of being a servant to this emotion called fear. Alright? Let's skip down here. There is a way in which individuals can eliminate the influence of fear from their consciousness. Let's talk about that for a quick minute. How do we eliminate fear from our consciousness? First, you become familiar with the fundamental principles of life and establish a firm conviction that all the activities of the universe are essentially constructive and good. That it is only the viewpoint that makes some of them have the false appearance of being destructive. Okay? Second, let them establish in consciousness the fact that all of these good and constructive processes of nature are the result of the constructive, beneficent, merciful, loving consciousness of God. Third, let them recognize that all people are possessed for the creative power of God, are masters of their own careers, can create mentally and physically the things which will make them what the Creator has intended them to be. Fourth, let them practice the principles of their faith by refusing to visualize that which is unfortunate, destructive, unhappy, sinful, or inharmonious to their best interest. Finally, let the venturesome and the brave realization that to overcome evil is easier than to escape the conclusion and creations of their own thinking. The strong are brave, and the brave are venturesome. Only the weak are hesitant, and only the hesitant are fearful. Each venture into the unknown, whether of business, of study, investigation, or life, is a victorious conquest. Be brave, therefore, and shake off the shackles of fear. When each new venture will bring strength to the character, fortitude of the emotions, and encouragement and progress to the mind of peace. That kind of says it all in a nutshell. Okay? But let's back up here for a quick minute. It goes on to say that, where's it right up here? It goes on in the beginning to say, in dealing with eliminating fear from the subconscious, we have to recognize first two facts here. Okay? One, as it said here, that all people are possessed of the creative power of God or the Creator. So if you have that latent ability within you and you tap into the divine, you can eliminate fear. You will eliminate fear. Your thought process changes. Because right there, if you have that connection, as it says, you are a manifestation of the divine. Now, when you go back into the religious Bible, per se, okay, it says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, God breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So the essence of the Creator exists within each and every one of us. Okay? I'm going to stop there. We're going to finish up with this. So if we have the essence of the Creator instilled in each and every one of us, why in the world would we go outside of ourselves, okay, looking for solutions and answers to problems that we'll never find those answers on the outside? So that the master within, tapping into the master within and developing the inner alchemy of the mind, these are the processes of how you attain those levels, how you raise yourself up to the realization. So when I say raise, and you hear me say that terminology a lot, when I say raise yourself up to the realization, it's not just a philosophical term thrown out there to gravitate towards. It means putting in the work. That's the way you raise yourself up to the realization, not following something or somebody, you doing it for self. And like I said, real truth is confirmed when one can confirm it for self. Nobody can force you to accept a truth. You understand? You have to go on that journey, or you have to go on that quest to seek that divine truth, that divine principle. And by doing so, when you rely on the master within, you conquer the emotions of fear. Okay? So we're going to stop there. We're just going to make a couple of quick announcements before we do. Reminder to tune into the show this Thursday, which I believe is July 9th, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We got Brother Panic back on the show. And as you know, Brother Panic's been on the show a few times. And when he comes on the show, it is a long show. So definitely prepare yourselves to be here for a while. Last show was 5 hours. We go thorough and deep when Brother Panic comes on the show. And this show we're going to be talking about on this Thursday night, spiritual alchemy and ancestral magic. So we're going to go in heavy on these topics and dispel a lot of the myths and spookism and evil connotations that is associated with these subjects, because that's another system of indoctrination that's instilled in people's subconscious minds to create fear. Because when you indoctrinate something, for an example, when you hear spiritual magic, the first thing most people will think is voodoo, Satanism, some type of witchcraft, something negative, because they've already established the norm on what that really means, when it doesn't really mean that. So we'll dispel a lot of the myths and negative connotations that ancestral magic is connected with. So we will address all that. And again, as I said, Brother Panic goes in very hard and very detailed and in depth. So we'll have him on Thursday night, June 9th, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So definitely don't miss that show. And we will have an soon upcoming date for some classes that we will be doing down in the Fort Lauderdale, Miami, also Tampa, Orlando, Florida area. So if you're able to make some of those events, we would love to see you there. So those are forthcoming. And there will be, I believe it's the 3rd, I will get the exact date of this month, the 3rd or the 4th Saturday of this month, we will be doing, I myself will be doing another lecture in a class at Sophia's Garden of Ma'at. I'll get that date exactly for you on the next post. Can't remember if it's the 3rd or the 4th Saturday, but we'll get that for you. But anyway, that's what I got for you now. We'll pick another topic next week, whatever that is, and we'll do it. And wherever the ancestors guide us, obviously that's where we go. So again, do not let fear control your emotions. Do not let it enslave you. And do not be resistant to change. It's your brother Benichi Amun Ray saying Hotep, and I will see you on the next post.